Hi, hello, mabuhay. Welcome back to another episode of Krista's Curiosity. And today I have a very special guest with me who's also a fellow podcaster and all around kind of arts activist, like writer, creative with me. And Shin Yu Pai, can you introduce yourself to like my audience?
Sure. I'm Shin Yi. I am the host and creator of a podcast called 10,000 Things, which is a series about Asian American stories that I started producing in 2022 with KUW Public Radio and eventually decided to take independent. And so been making that show for the last 5 years. But most people in this community will probably know me for my poetry.
Yes.
Previously, I was the civic poet for the city of Seattle from 2023 to 2024 and was also poet laureate for the city of Redmond.
That's so exciting. I follow you on LinkedIn, so I see the little editorials and all of like the awards and shout outs that you are featured in, which I think is really cool because I went to UW and I like studied English creative writing. So I feel like that's like another connection I feel strongly with you. But a little bit more about your podcast. I believe you had, when we talked a while ago, you said this was the final season for it. Yeah, can you tell us about like the journey you've had from like the growth and like seeing it to the end now?
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's always really important for me to talk about the origin story for
Yes.
how I created the podcast. So, in 2021, it was the second year of the pandemic and the Atlanta spa shootings happened. And it was this time when there was so much difficult news and media about Asian Americans in the news. And I decided at that time that I wanted to develop a story series, a podcast series that could really, put in popular mainstream media the kind of stories that I wanted to see and hear about Asian Americans that could be life affirming and feel like they, that they validated our existence in the world. And so I pitched it to KUW. I knew an editor there and kind of went through this process and got commissioned to make this a season of the show, and it got renewed for a couple of seasons. And then in 2024, they decided not to renew the show. And so I went out on my own and I found a production company in New York, Wonder Media Network, which is part of ACAST Creative Studios, and partnered with them to make last season and this final season of the show. So that's kind of how it looked, I guess, logistically. For me as a show, it's really evolved. Like, I think in those early days, it was a show that was very much about, I have a lot of friends and community members in my life who, are artists and activists. And so those were the kinds of stories that I wanted to put on the radio or on podcasts that could kind of, I think, imagine or expand the ways of being Asian in the world outside of the model minority stereotype. But I think as like time went on, there were ways in which the show also kind of changed and shifted. To include other kinds of identities or to include storytellers who I didn't know personally. And then I think in the last season, I felt like it was like what I like to call like my tour of sadness, because it was like a season that was very much about grieving and letting go of past identities and letting the show become something in a popular space outside of public radio. And I think with this final season, I'm kind of returning to the roots of the show, which I feel like are really in like wonder and delight about these stories that aren't often told. And I'm interviewing like a visual artist, Rob Ree, who makes like his sculptural works out of like gourds that he grows. And then I'm interviewing Maritess Zurbano, who is the first Filipina magician to come up through the magic circuit through Las Vegas, and just some really unusual Asian American stories that kind of fill up my heart and give me hope for the future.
Yeah, I think two of the episodes that really stood out to me when I was listening was the disability one with Alice Wong and also the Nono Boy with Sean Wong.
Oh.
Yeah, because I did not get to take a class with him, unfortunately, but all of my friends who did said that he was an amazing professor. And I think through listening to that, I was like, I can see why, because he was very headstrong in what he believed in during a time where everyone and everything was against him. So I think, I really liked listening to your podcast.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I feel like Sean was visionary, and ahead of his time. And, in that work that he was doing as a literary editor and creating an archive alongside that now exists for researchers, he's a beautiful example of literary activism and activism that can be kind of, expressed through one's practice or one's kind of, passions. So I love other examples of the ways in which we can all be activists.
Do you have any, like, if somebody were to start listening to your podcast, like, what are some standout episodes that you would personally recommend to them?
I love the episode from season 1 about the calophone, which is kind of like a vintage record player that is installed in the Panama Tea Room down in the International District. And it's a story, it's a conversation with Mako Kikuchi, who is a sound artist who talks about his research into archives and developing music that responds to a memoir by his great-grandfather. And I think that's a really beautifully sound designed episode that is also located in a place that people can visit, which kind of brings it alive. Yeah.
That also brings up another point of you had an exhibit in the Wing Luke Museum. Is it down already?
So the Wing Luke Museum opened a show in March 2025.
Yes.
That is something that I organized and curated, and is basically a exhibition that is based on objects and stories from 10,000 Things. And that show is actually about to get a refresh of items rotating out of the exhibition with some new ones coming in May. And that show will be up until January 2027.
Nice. I saw the first viewing of it last year in March or May. So sometime like literally last year around spring. And I really liked how interactive it was because I went with a friend and we did like the little prompts that were in there.
Yeah.
I think, what was one of them? I think they were all very reflective and introspective of like, what do you want to see more out of yourself, and like what do you like kind of like wish to see. And my friend and I kind of needed that like visit because we were kind of down in that point of our life, being post-grad and kind of like, how do we navigate this world and kind of the crazy world we live in. But I thought that was like a really cute and fun exercise to do together because I still have the pictures that like we had written, and I feel like they give me like a sense of hope that like everything is gonna be okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about the new objects that might come in May, or?
Yeah, so there are going to be 2 visual art pieces by the artist Rob Ree, who I described earlier in this conversation. He makes sculptures out of fragments and gourds that he has influenced in the growing process. So they don't look like normal pear or like gooseneck shaped gourds. They look often like much wilder shapes that he then kind of like alters in some way. And so there are a couple of pieces that will be coming in from him. And then Maritess Zurbano, who I mentioned, who's a magician, she's lent a deck of her cards and poker chips, which are a reflection of her time as a poker dealer
That's so cool.
I think it was the Dunes Hotel in Las Vegas. And then we are bringing in a jade necklace from Andrew Chin from the Ampersand Bike Club, and in that case the piece of jade belonged to his grandmother, and he received it after her death, and it's something that he wears to feel connected to her as kind of almost like a power, a kind of totem of power, or like a talismanic object. And so let's see, and then Susan Liu, who is a performer and a memoirist. She is lending us a dress that belonged to her mother, who has passed away, but it was one of her mother's favorite dresses, and it's kind of a symbol of idealized beauty and like the things that the perfect weight or the perfect look that we have to adhere to be able to adhere to beauty standards. Yeah, so those are just a few of the items.
It's exciting. That's definitely different from what I had saw when I had visited a year ago. So I can't wait to see it in May.
Yeah.
I should have preferenced this when I had asked, but how did you get like your show in the Wing Luke museum? Like, was it they reached out to you, or you reached out to them, or like how did that partnership come about?
So they have an open proposal process that is described on their website. But I also went to school with Jessica Rubenacker, who is a former exhibitions director for the museum, and she was one of the guests and storytellers on season 1 of the show. So yeah, we have a very old and deep friendship, and I had been kind of noodling on the idea of what would it be to bring this show and these objects into a 3-dimensional space of a gallery, and talked to her about putting together a proposal for an exhibition. And so she helped to shepherd it, and I think it went up for review to their exhibitions committee, and they decided that they wanted to do a small show related to the podcast.
That's amazing. I love that Seattle is bringing more open-ended ideas, kind of like your show, into existence. But kind of going back to the podcast, since it's in its last season, is there anything like creative that you want to pursue outside of the podcast once it's done? Or like, I know that's like kind of like a scary question because you had mentioned how last season was like a tour of grieving, and I feel like last year was definitely a grieving moment, grieving year.
Yeah. So, you know, working on a podcast requires a pretty big team. Like at KUW, I had like 2 people and a small marketing team that worked on the show. And like now I have 10 people that work on the show with me, and I'm responsible for executive producing as well as a lot of fundraising. And so, as somebody who kind of came from the poetry world and being an independent writer, which is kind of scrappy, I knew how to do those things, but I honestly long for the times where there is no budget, you know, and there is no staff, and it's just me and a page and writing a poem, and the stakes are so much lower. And I can make different kinds of mistakes or experiments. And the thing that I'm working on for later this year is in August, I am in an exhibition called Threaded by Language at the Vestibule Gallery in Ballard. And so for the show, I'm actually making 3 different embroideries, embroidery on paper as well as embroidery on cloth, that are a kind of series of work that represent my relationship to loss of culture and language through being, you know, the daughter of like Taiwanese immigrants.
Oh, okay.
And so this kind of different way of working with mark making and with embroidery with the hands in a really tactile way. I'm very excited to, you know, try exploring and looking at different forms of expression for myself that are much quieter. You know, and, you know, they aren't as widely distributed. Someone has to go to the gallery, they have to look at the show, you know, and the pieces on the wall, and that's it. You know, like they got to go to the thing, and when the thing is over, the thing is over.
It's more of like a personal, intimate connection with what you want to produce. And I feel like that is something I want to explore more of with my own personal writing that I just haven't had time to, because like you get so caught up in work and life and everything in between. So I'm glad to hear that. But I guess my last question, because this is a question I ask like every guest I've had on so far, for the arts and community, or arts culture community scene here in Seattle, what do you hope to see more of in terms of like what the city can do for like local organizations or artists, and just to enhance the beauty of art here?
Yeah, I just want to take that question out of the context of like city funding or government support, and just talk about maybe what excites me. I spent the morning having a conversation with Lily Barnett, who is this fantastic Asian American curator who is revitalizing the old Mad Art studio space in South Lake Union, which was a big gallery for large art installations. And she is reimagining it as a space she's calling Chispa. And it's going to be a kind of art and technology innovation lab. And Lily previously worked at Facebook Meta as well as with Microsoft, and so like in a lot of technology environments with artists and technology. And we talked a lot about this idea of, I think, spaces and initiatives that are led by artists and what we can learn from that. And so I am excited about things like that that are artist or creative led, where, the space was available and there was a thing that she wanted to continue beyond, Facebook Meta, and continuing this exploration of art and technology. And so I think that's really bold and daring and, outside the bounds of what, a corporate organization would want, right? She can make whatever she wants. And I think too, about organizations like Common Area Maintenance in Belltown, who last year they bought a derelict building for $20, and they are going to, raise a lot of capital to make that into artist housing. And I think about spaces that are artist-led. I feel like the grocery down in Beacon Hill also kind of speaks to me on that level, in that, it was a couple of artists who really wanted to imagine a space for community, and they built it, and they host events and concerts and performances. And I think what I want to see is the creation of spaces outside of institutions, that find different ways to make it work, and different models. And that is what excites me more than, I don't know, perhaps bigger art spaces and developments that are funded by big philanthropy or, for tourism and commercial type, purposes.
Yeah. That is very similar to what Amy had said in January. I think her answer was more about like, how can we utilize spaces that are already for the community for other purposes outside of like a gallery. Like, I think she's just more open to having, like, for example, like for Slip, I think she was saying how like I've let a Tai Chi class in during the morning, and like I know nothing about Tai Chi, but I think it was like fun for both opportunists to learn about Tai Chi and for them to be in the space.
Yeah.
So I think that is a running theme that I've heard people say. So thank you for your wisdom.
Yeah, thank you. I think artists and art for social good is kind of the vision.
Yes, and we will end it there. So thank you for listening. Thank you.